Hey, hey. I'm so happy to be here. Some people that I've known for a long time. I met Tony back in 2012 when I reached out to Ableton. I was working with a nonprofit. We wanted to put Ableton on a computer lab, and they were like, "What? What are you doing?" They had never really seen it working with middle schoolers and high schoolers back then. I'm very proud to say that one of the first times, if not the first time, Gerhard ever saw. Their CEO saw Ableton being used in a high school classroom was in a YPG class. So we've been in the mix with Ableton and bringing it into the K-12 space for a long time. My focus today is going to be on project-based learning, which I think we all probably know a little bit about, but we're going to be drilling into the strategies that we use in Young Producers Group and things that you guys can be doing to learn through doing with your students that is different from the way that music education often happens in a K-12 environment, which is much more like band, orchestra, choir kind of thing. I think we're all I'm preaching to the choir in the room here. Yeah, we're gonna dig into all this stuff because I know people are coming at it from all different angles. So we're gonna start off by trying to really drill down into why we want to use project-based learning. We're gonna look at how to build creative community. And folks, if there's one thing that the YPG Young Producers Group pedagogy is about, is creative community. We want to make it where the room itself is buzzing with creative energy, and you can kind of just get out of the way. You set the conditions for a creative community to happen, and let it roll. We're then going to drill into the pedagogy of how to actually do this, finishing with listening parties. So at the end of each project, having students actually share their work, which is a lot easier said than done. We're gonna present some very specific strategies that we use to make that successful. So I'm gonna have points in the session that are open to have you guys ask questions. But if at any point you guys want to know more, ask me about something, please feel free to stop me. I've got this presentation, but I really would love for this to be more of a conversation than anything else. Again, I'm so happy to be here with everybody. It's so cool to have Ableton folks from all over the world and rad educator homies here as well. So let's dig into it. So a little bit of my credentials here, right? Ableton certified trainer. Dustin and I were certified together in 2014. So over 10 years ago. It's kind of insane to think about. Geezers. So I started Young Producers Group and I design all of the curricula. We are working with entire school districts all over the country. Several of these we work with all schools in that district. Others are just bits and pieces. And then we work with dozens and dozens of individual schools as well. LAUSD is our home district for better and for worse. We are based here in LA. I just want to give some love to my city that's been taking a beating for the last little bit. Okay, cool. Moving on. Why project-based learning? I'm gonna start with a video. This is a clip from our capstone curriculum where we interview professionals in the industry about what they do, learning how they actually do their job, how they've built their careers. And I think hearing from this gentleman, Drew Sliger, who is Lil Nas X's vocal engineer. He recorded him on Industry Baby and has worked with all these artists that you see here. He's one of the resident engineers at Crosby Recording Studios in Burbank, where a million different people have recorded. I think, again, the best way to talk about why project-based learning is to look at how he's done this and some of the things that he's stepped in and why you want to have a project-based learning approach before you get into trouble.
The moment, but it's like I've definitely been in situations where I've made some people upset because I haven't recorded something that needed to be recorded, or just gets learning experiences, right? But it's like never made that mistake again.
Right. So he's talking here about he was in a recording session and people were expecting him to just be recording the whole time because that's what you're supposed to do. He didn't know to do that, got in some trouble and learned, right? Learning through doing. He was in a session, made a mistake, and that's how you learn. You don't learn by just talking about a recording session. You learn by actually having a recording session. And if we can, in a safe space of a school, safe space of a class, or of a private lesson, create the conditions that would sort of mirror a professional environment, they can make that mistake with us, right? And we can kind of lift them up safely and give them the space that they need to fall on their face and be successful through that process. So again, learning through doing and making mistakes, that's what we're shooting for. That's what we want. Okay, creative community. As I was saying, if we are having people learning through doing and they are making mistakes, we want to make sure that it is a safe space where people feel engaged, people feel really connected, and there's a strong social thing happening in the room. Because if it's top down, it's not going to work. Band, orchestra, choir follows a top-down model where you have the band director on top, sort of first and second chairs there, and then kind of everybody else, right? And you have your baton, and you've got your little soldiers marching behind you, and generally the band director is the person that's picking the music, and it's very top-down. I'm gonna go to this next piece here. So this circle, think of it as a flat circle like this, right? So you have your band director on top, kind of top down here. In a creative community, it's a flat circle where all tastes are valid, all experiences are welcome. No piece of music, no genre of music is incorrect. And I think so often in music education, we think of a sort of right way and a wrong way. We think of styles that are high and we think of styles that are kind of low. And for us, I think as educators, if we want to have a truly inclusive environment where students can do their thing, we have to make sure that we are checking our taste, right? We are checking our own bias in how we engage with our students. If you don't like something, great. That's a very fertile space to engage and try to understand why they like something. And if a student can justify why they made a decision, and they can justify that within the project that you have in place, guess what? They're right? And I think that's really the thing that we have to be aiming to set up with the way that we have our classroom structure. So a creative community, again, is going to be much more of a flat circle than a traditional top-down education approach. So for many years of doing this, these are the creative community essentials that we really think should be in every single classroom that we work with. Creative communities are built on trust. Teachers must trust their students. This is kind of a big thing. A lot of times teachers can have, I'm not saying any of the teachers in the room here, but a lot of teachers can have a bit of a, thinking that their kids are not always going to be as engaged, right? They can kind of have a little bit of deficit thinking about students. That really gets in the way. Students will pick up on that immediately, right? And they will also pick up on the fact that if you think they can do amazing stuff and you have really high expectations of them, then that's going to be a good motivator for them to really rise to that occasion. I would say truly, I know we have a wide range of situations in the room. We were talking about the Campbell Hall studio, right, which is beautiful, state-of-the-art kind of stuff. That's great, right? That also sets the conditions for having a great creative community in the room. But you can build an amazing environment, an amazing class culture with just Chromebooks and headphones and a pair of speakers. It doesn't need to be a fancy environment, but it does need to have the right sort of the right sort of ideas in place for that to really click. And students must trust each other, right? They must have faith that they're not going to be made fun of, which is huge if you're talking about 8th graders, right? You're talking about high schoolers, but especially middle school. It's no shit, right? They really take it seriously. And then students must trust their teachers. And this is really a big thing. They have to know that you're going to keep them safe, right? They have to really believe that it is a creative environment where they can say what they like and not be made fun of. They can share their work in a way that they're going to be respected. So trust is a really, really important thing. And I'm a really big believer in being explicit about that. Saying this out loud, making those expectations clear that this is a safe space where you can trust me to have your back. So this plays into this next piece here, right? Creative communities will only develop if there's a supportive class culture. This photo here is from a school that we used to work with. We still license curricula to them. We don't have a teacher there anymore. But when we did, this was at Markham Middle School in Watts. This school was not the best, right? There was a lot of challenges at the school. But we were able to, over the course of actually years, develop a really strong class culture to where they knew that, okay, in our music tech class with YPG, there's a different sort of vibe. This bottom point here of developing a class culture can be particularly challenging in schools that struggle with a larger, not great school culture. I don't want to be naive and just say, hey, set up a great class culture and it'll all fall into place. Sometimes it's really not that easy. You can be really up against it if all your other teachers and all the other classes are, not treating students with respect and it's not such a good vibe. Having them be able to just kind of flip a switch when they walk into your room, again, takes consistency, and it takes laying down the explanation that this is a safe space where you can trust me. But yeah, class culture is everything. Students and teachers are encouraged to bring their almost full selves, right? You're not going to talk about every single thing that you're doing, every single thing that you're into, but I do think that it is really important that we as teachers bring ourselves to the classroom. I think for people that are teaching in private institutions or doing private lessons, this might not be as resonant, but for the folks that are actually working in K-12 schools, I think there's a pressure on teachers to kind of do a khaki pants, button-up shirt version of themselves. And I think that students are also encouraged to kind of check their personalities at the door and fit into a rather narrow space of what a student should be. And I think that that's a huge disservice because that sucks out all the authenticity, right? You don't have to say you like everything, right? You shouldn't be, giving that energy. But if you say you don't like something, it's still like leaving space for those other people to be, expressing themselves as well. Again, this is the inclusivity that is such an important part of a good music class that I think oftentimes just is not there. Does this resonate with folks, this idea of sort of like I don't know why schools are just sort of not human spaces. If someone could give me a good explanation, I'd love to hear it. I think that it's, maybe what happens is we get into this sort of just year over year churn where we do this thing and we do it again and we do it again until we graduate, right? Sir?
I think that's an interesting take. I think I obviously sit in an interesting space. I have 3 children myself.
Okay.
My youngest is 18.
Okay.
And then they've all come through, my youngest came through the music program. But I think to your point, what I see a lot of times when I work as a teaching artist in schools teaching what this is considered a special.
Right.
A lot of core teachers, there's a lot of division in all schools, public schools. And what I've seen a lot of times, not every teacher, but some teachers, core teachers, work against the idea of specials, the idea of extracurricular stuff because they feel like it's a diversion and they wonder where you're getting these resources from and I want potential.
Sure.
That's some of the,
right.
That might be some of the coldness that of the non-humanness that can be felt sometimes in schools. I've definitely felt that being a specialist.
Right. Well, this is the thing, right? I think music especially, but I think the arts in general just cuts right to the core of who someone is. They play a piece of music that they made, you're getting a window into that person's soul. And I think if we're trying to create a space that's sterile, trying to create a space, again, it can't be full on, we're all talking about everything because, we got to have some lines, of course. But I think that it's so important as music teachers, and especially as creative music teachers, where we have people making stuff and sharing stuff, that we encourage humanity in our classrooms. And you have to model that too. And I think, frankly, this is scary for a lot of teachers who are used to putting on those khaki pants and that button-up shirt, and that's that. No disrespect, Will. Will's really cool. Will's been ahead of the curve for a very long time. But yeah. Moving on. All right, so let's dig into the nitty-gritty here of the pedagogy, right? How we actually do this. Starting with the projects themselves. Right, we talk about project-based learning. It's got to have good projects. Learning through doing, but doing what? What makes a great project? In my mind, there's really two things that make a great project. And I want to be clear about what I'm saying about a project. This is a big thing that students will be working on over the course of multiple classes. This is not just a little exercise that they're doing or a quick thing. This is, in my mind, a big thing that they'll be working on consecutively and then having some sort of culminating thing at the end. In my mind, a great project is open-ended in terms of how students can do it, but very specific in what we want them to do, skills and techniques-wise, right? We'll talk about some examples over the next piece, but if we want folks to learn about recording, right? And we want to talk about how to use a microphone. Those are specific skills that students are going to do, but not saying you have to record this type of thing at this tempo and it's got to be this kind of super regimented deal. I think by leaving space for students to do the things that are meaningful for them, they're going to buy into it because it's their thing, not your thing. And I think, again, this is in a creative community. If it's top down, then they're just kind of clocking in, clocking out, doing what you tell them to do, kind of working the machine, which, hey, there's still a lot of great things that can happen there. But I think if we want to have a really thriving creative community where students have internal motivation to engage and to really push themselves and each other, they have to see themselves in it. But we also have to make sure that students are doing the things and learning the things that they need to, going from 0 to 100 over the course of that year. Now, I think a lot of teachers are doing some project-based learning, but doing this over the course of a semester or two, not just having, hey, we're going to do this little project and it's going to be cool, but actually really thinking about how to make this work over the course of a year takes some real finesse. Sequencing is essential. You want each project to be playing off the last one and setting up the next one, right? So that's really tough. And this is where I think a lot of people who really know their stuff about music production and music technology struggle, because you can design a great project, but having that actually work over the course of a curriculum, over the course of a year where it really sequences and you have students doing their thing, but having like their hands held along the way, that's really tough. So even folks who know their stuff about production can really struggle to put together an effective production curricula. Also, if you're gonna be doing project-based learning, you can't just be doing projects. I'm sure Katie can talk a little bit about this, right? Sometimes you can get into a place of a little bit of like what we call project fatigue, right? To where you're doing a project, you do your listening party, which we'll talk about, next project, listen, and it can get a little bit dry, right? We want to keep it fresh. Just like when you're in a session, you want to make sure that you don't lose that magic. So we see some ways to avoid project fatigue, including smaller scale projects, maybe day, 2-day things, exercises, and games. I have a game set up for us to play today, to later down the line when it might be getting a little bit dry, that you guys can take and use. But again, it's this idea of project-based learning is so important, but if that's all you're doing, if you're just doing projects, you will run out of gas after a while. It's important to mix it up and keep it fresh. Okay, let's talk about an example from our curricula that I think has a good explainer of this like open-ended execution, specific skill set building. So in our Music Production 2 curriculum, which focuses on live, we have a sampling project where the only rule is make a piece of music that exclusively uses samples. So no synths, no recording, right? It's just synthesizers. You have to synthesize your own drums. You have to, build every single piece from a synth. So in order to execute that, they're going to have to put all the skills that they've learned into effect. But they can do it in a way that is totally up to them, right? They can be making some hip hop, they can be making EDM, they can be making, whatever. And again, if we have a student who is, heavy into ambient music and they don't want to synthesize drums, okay, let's talk about drum synthesis. Let's make sure that you still know what you're talking about. But it's not going to be like, you must have a kick drum. You know what I mean? Like that, I think, again, is not responsive to who those people are actually in the room. And that's the number one thing. I want to be clear that this project is preceded, right, by exercises where students explore oscillators, filters, envelopes, LFOs, right? They learn how to actually use a subtractive synth through these smaller scale exercises, and then boom, put it into effect in this larger project. Thoughts on this? Questions? I see some people taking pictures, writing things down. Cool. Yeah.
Will this be available like a PowerPoint presentation?
Totally happy to share this with everybody for sure. I can whip up a quick QR code and get this over to you guys. Okay, yeah.
I've just got a quick question. It's mentioning sampling and sampling project, but then it's preceded by exercises where the students explore oscillators.
This is a mistake on my part. Excuse me. This I mushed two projects together. This should be for our synthesizer project. So for our sampling project. Good catch there, Mike.
I had the same question.
I was going to say, I think it's a new project.
So
This makes sense because the sampler, you just replace the oscillator with the sampler.
right. So this would you can kind of see the congruency there.
So you use a sample of a gas fire for white noise, for example.
Sure. Right. So for our sampling project, excuse me, this should have, I will make this edit. This should have, we get into like using audio tracks, using the simpler, that kind of thing.
I think I ask you this every time.
Yeah.
The copyright issues. When do you bring that? What do you say? About
Right.
copyright?
So we are very, in terms of a K-12, if you're in a classroom environment, you have a lot of leeway with fair use. Once you start trying to sell it, that's when there's a problem. But if you're just doing it in the class as a workshop style thing, you're good to go. In general, I'm always going to be leaning on do the thing, sample it. We're learning here. The projects that we do in the class are not supposed to be your big breakout record, right? Can be. We've seen it happen. But it's not something that is designed to be, these are exercises, these are projects that we're doing in a classroom environment. But to this point, that is a very important teachable moment that we'll talk about. A student might say, hey, I tried to post this on SoundCloud, it got flagged, what do I do? Okay, let's talk about copyright, right? We have a whole deep unit on copyright in our capstone curriculum, which is music, focuses on business a lot, right? It's advanced music tech and business. But for this, we're just taking the creative lens and trying to understand the tools. We will talk about copyright in this because it's an important dynamic, but we kind of think about this in terms of like the fair use for education. Okay. So we were very happy to participate in a Move pilot program, and we brought this into our one of the schools that we work with at Loxa. And me and one of the YPG instructors, we thought about, all right, how do we want to bring this project-based learning approach to Move? There were some awesome Ableton resources that we also used, but we were thinking about, how can we kind of bring our spin to this and do the things that we really know work with students. So we designed a little 5-part Move mini curriculum that students really, really responded well to, and being that this is sort of Move Day, I wanted to be sure to highlight this and talk about this with the crew. So the first thing that we did is we got into like how to actually move through Move. What are you looking at? learn just the basic layout, not going too deep, right? Notice important buttons and knobs. We didn't talk about every single thing, because especially in the beginning, you want to get folks making music as quick as possible. But we basically sort of said, all right, this is the general layout of what we're looking at. From there, boom, straight into sequencing drums. So create a drum loop to understand sequencing on moves. So we got into presets, looked at how to use tempo, and then showed them how to choose different drum sounds and to make their own patterns like that. So they know the lay of the land. They've made a drum piece. Again, we're not saying use this tempo. We're not saying use this kit. We're giving them space to find the things that they like. Once they have a drum beat going, cool, let's record a bass line. So we've got the sequencing piece using the sequencer on Move. Now we get into recording. So record a bass line to understand recording notes on Move. So again, looking at presets, getting into the scales. Yeah.
I have a question going to the beats.
Okay.
How do you give them any beat theory, or do you talk about kick drum on 1, backbeats on 2 and 4, or do you just let them go?
So we talk about it. I talk about this a little bit in this sort of like hardware implementation strategies piece here. But in general, we try to steer away from that. We might say, hey, oftentimes there'll be a kick on 1, snare on 2 and 4, and you'll add some more rhythms with hi-hats. But that's true for a lot of music, but not for a lot of other stuff that we might not even be aware of.
When you say create a drum loop, do you give them any criteria or any restrictions? Or
Not really.
Just make any?
Not really. Generally, and we'll get into this when we take a bigger look at sort of like the more of the pedagogy, how I would respond to that is if we're cruising around as students are working and student raises their hand and says, I don't like what I don't like what I made, right? If they express, hey, this is not what I'm trying to do, okay, what are you trying to do, right? If we give too much of a bumper of what you're, kind of the lane that we expect you to go in, that's going to put our sort of structure on it. But you do need scaffolding, right? There does need to be assistance for students as they are building this stuff, but we can keep it pretty open. And again, let the students tell you when they don't like something. Because sometimes they might really dig just the like stuff that they can kind of spit out, and who are you to say that that's wrong? I've found something, I see your hand, I'll call you in a sec. I've found something, this is kind of moving into a different space. We all know the sort of Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing, right? I also think that there is a sort of genius to your first 10 hours to where you have no idea what you're doing, right? The first, maybe, we do an A-B project as our first project within our Music Production 2 curriculum. Maybe 1 out of every 50 songs that we hear like that are totally psychedelic, insane techno. You're just like, whoa. I want to hear this 4 a.m. on a big function 1, right? And they're just like, I don't know. It's just like a little, 12-year-old boy made it. He's like, and that's the best, right? So I think if we say like your kick has to be on 1, snare on 2 and 4, you can pull them out of that. But it's unique to each student. So I'm a little hesitant to make an umbrella statement. Sir.
Well, I think you sort of answered it when I'm about to ask you, but in terms of approaching this curriculum with Move.
Yeah.
So with new students, do you find that they gravitate to the idea of step sequencing? Are you teaching them kind of like the idea of step sequencing first when building drums? Or are you allowing them or teaching them the idea of kind of playing it in?
So first thing I'll say is students love light up buttons, right? The move, push, these things are like moth to a flame, right? So they're down. The moment that you take this out, they're like sick, right? But I think that most folks, when they're getting started, respond better to sequencing, right? Instead of actually playing something in by hand. And I think once you have drums in place, then we can start getting into recording, right? But I think we want to generally start with the path of least resistance to making music, especially when we're talking about young kids. who might think of themselves not as musicians. You know, there's a lot of kids who are placed in music class because they have a free period at that time. That's the elective. Cool, you're a producer now. What? I don't even, you know. So I think we want to really try in the beginning to make it super accessible, and hitting buttons is a lot easier for me than playing in time. You know. I mean, we have some rad musicians in the room who will be performing later who kill it, but you know. We all ramp up to get there, right? Cool. We talk about recording, adding another layer. Go deeper with recording and sequencing on Move. Add another layer. What layer would that be? That's up to them. We've already talked about putting, you know, some sequences together. We've already talked about recording, so they know the kind of mechanics of how to do that, and they can go now and sort of pull on the thread that they like. Then expand the session. Take that nugget of an idea, copy it, make some variations, and then we start using the session view on Move. So this is very student-centered, but they're learning all the things so that they can use Move effectively. Any questions on this? Yeah, Katie. No, this is something that is literally a document that I copied from to put in here. We are, talking about making some videos and stuff for this. Because, the kids loved it. They really, really ate it up. But we learned a lot, because teaching hardware is very different than teaching software. And in general, our bag is teaching DAWs, right? So learning how to make this work in a hardware format required some learning from us. And I wanted to share that with you guys because I know a lot of folks have hardware in their rooms and want to share what we learned. So the cadence of instruction is really important. How are you bringing this information to folks, and how are they consuming it, and then what? Right? Because if you just go through the whole sequence of what to do and say, all right, cool, that's going to be really tough. So what we've found is that this teacher demonstrates, students try it on their own, regroup, kind of repeat the loop format really works. With these steps, right? Teacher would break the concepts into manageable steps students can follow in real time. And those things would be like small, 5-minute steps, right? So once a teacher does a demonstration, then the student will sort of replicate that demonstrated skill in their own way immediately after the teacher's explanation. Now this, guys, is the really big thing here that I'm going to be talking about over and over again. The teacher has to circulate. You're not just being like, all right, I showed it to you. Cool, do it, right? This is when you cruise around the room, peer over people's shoulders. Sure, that will keep them on task, but even more than that, you're able to see, all right, this kid's obviously hitting the wrong buttons in the wrong mode. Students might not be comfortable asking for help. A lot of kids aren't. And I think, again, as we are creating a class culture, a creative community, we want to create that space where students feel comfortable to raise their hand, but it might take some time. So an example here of the demonstration, in student work time piece is a teacher shows how to use a step sequencer to create a kick pattern, and students immediately try it on their own. So again, you would demonstrate, here's how you create a kick pattern using Move. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, you guys give it a shot. They do it, you're cruising around, you come back together. You might then, with the regroup, do a little discussion about it, maybe a review, and see if maybe a student wants to share what they did. That you're not going to be able to do that every single step of the way, but you want to bring people together and keep everybody moving as a group. One thing I did want to highlight is visibility, right? If you are teaching hardware, you got to make sure that students can see it, and they can't all just be gathered around trying to catch a view. We have overhead cameras up here, which we see are just phones, right? So there's ways to connect your phone to Zoom. There's ways to connect your phone to a lot of different things. You can also get an overhead camera on Amazon for like $20. So having an overhead camera that connects to your projector is really important. It's obvious, but I want to highlight that. You can also use pre-made videos and diagrams as a way to show it, but it's always going to be better to have it be live in the room in that moment. Okay, this, folks, when I am talking to band, orchestra, and choir directors, this is the toughest part for them, because they're used to a rehearsal performance model where the teacher is always the person driving the action. And when you have students sitting with their headphones on, staring at a computer, that kind of makes them like, they don't really know what to do, because that doesn't look like learning. And sometimes too, your admin might walk in the room and they'll be like, what's going on here, right? Nothing's happening. But in fact, everything is happening. That is the most important piece. And this is where, I think oftentimes, teachers just feel like it's not enough or like it's not active. But again, this is the most important thing. Because again, you're not just like foot up at your desk checking your email. You're circulating. You're walking around. You're making sure that everybody is engaged and everybody's getting what they need. And this is where, again, the sort of class culture, the creative community, and the trust is so important. Because look, you can use things like GoGuardian. You can use things to make sure you can block all kinds of websites. Students will find a way around it, and feeling policed, feeling regulated is not a good vibe, right? That does not create that sort of trust that should be at the core of a creative community. This is where the internal motivation, where if they really want to engage, they're going to. And if they're not doing it, that is going to be a sign for you that, hey, something isn't quite working here. Although I do want to say, even at our most, even at LOXA, where, these kids are hardcore artists that come in as ninth graders, with an incredible practice, even them will sometimes go on YouTube. Even them will sometimes go on and it doesn't have to be like right? It can be like, hey, put that away. This is sort of the cool thing about teaching with a computer is we are like standing on an infinite pool. It's also one of the real challenges of teaching with a computer is it's everything, right? And it's up to you to really try to build that internal motivation with students. So, this is sort of like the big ideas of how we want to have our student work time. Your lectures, and I've found, should really never be longer than 20 minutes. If they're longer than 20 minutes, you're going to have some eyes glazing over. It's just going to happen. So keeping it tight, keeping it moving with what you're doing, and having the student work time take the most amount of time is good. And also, we teach in a lot of schools where students aren't necessarily able to make music at home. And it's important that we keep it equitable so that students can have the time that they need without necessarily having to rely on a home environment to make that happen. So it's really, really important that we leave enough time at school for students to make their music. Class time is the best time to work. I'm going to skip to this bottom piece here. Teachable moments. This is everything, right? As you're circulating through the room, you're going to see maybe 2 or 3 kids making the same mistake. You can say, ladies and gentlemen, can you please DJ style your headphones, right? Put them around your neck. Can I have your attention, please? I'm noticing that a few of you are doing, the same thing. Let's talk about this. Because you can do your best to come up with all the things that you want to talk about, but inevitably you're going to miss something. And 2 or 3 kids are going to step in that same pothole, and you want to make sure that you can catch that and address it. So those teachable moments are so, so important. And again, speak to the value of project-based learning. They're learning how to do it. If you're just learning about compression and not actually like compressing vocals, it's night and day, right? This gets into something, thank you, Trent, that I talk about, inspiration instead of intimidation. Right? It shouldn't be, I hope I don't get a bad grade, or I hope he doesn't catch me, whatever. But, I want to kill it too, right? And creating that environment where people are doing great work and getting celebrated for it. again, this is a thing where it's like a lot of teachers are hesitant to say good job. I don't get that. I really don't understand that. I go hard the other direction. I'm a really big believer in like a lot of positivity, right? Like really making students feel good about what they did. I think the nuance is they're not doing it for you, they're doing it for themselves, right? But really making them feel accomplished, that's a powerful feeling. And I guarantee it's not happening in all of their classes. So if they can feel really good in your room, that's going to be a huge driver for that internal motivation that we want to see. This might be getting a little bit into the weeds here, but
I've got a good one. What's an example of that? If the student's making something you don't like or don't understand, but you want to encourage them and be positive, what does that look like?
I would ask questions, right?
Okay.
So you can even say, hey, I don't understand this. Sorry, this little Britney Spears mic is annoying. I don't understand what you did here. Can you tell me why you did this? And that's actually a really important thing, because if they can't justify it, if they're just willy-nilly doing stuff and they don't have an intention behind it, then that's not ideal. That's not great.
So I've been working with kids recently a
Right,
lot.
right.
I've been having these same experiences, and the kids will often say, I don't know.
Well, that's not adequate, right? We would want to really drill down and say, okay, well, let's try to understand what you are trying to do. What do you like about this? How can we do more of that? How can we make that better? But I don't know doesn't cut it, right? Because that's not using terms, that's not using concepts, that's not actually understanding what they're doing. That's falling into kind of like a random thing, which, hey, we all can make some pretty cool stuff using, random stuff, but I think we want to really try as much as we can to have there always be an intention, and having those conversations with students will make them use those terms. And if they can't use those terms, again, teachable moment.
Is it always about creating like new original music from scratch, or is there ever about transcribing or recreating something?
We are pretty zeroed in on original music. We will have we do games where there's a game that we have called Transcriber Survivor, where you play a piece of audio and they would have to transcribe what is in there. So it could be maybe a kick, snare, hi-hat pattern, and you can write, kick SH and have them just like try to do it. Or the kind of level up for that is to actually have them transcribe it in the software, right? So they have to actually write it down in a step sequencer. So that, yes, but in general, we really put the emphasis on original music. So this is getting into this stuff right here, right? There is no such thing as good or bad, right? Whether you like it is irrelevant. That's your taste. Music is moving so fast. What sounds normal in 2025 sounded insane 10 years ago, 15 years ago. 1 year ago, really, it is moving super quickly, and it's really important for us to stay open-minded. And again, if students can justify and explain the intention behind their decisions, then it's right. I think when we are dealing with originals, right, students writing original music, it's a spectrum, right? Whereas if you're performing, if you're playing notes on a page, you're either hitting the notes or you're not. Right? It's a different kind of thing. So grading that is tough. We generally say for projects, did the students meet the requirement of the project? Did they demonstrate an understanding of underlying concepts? If those are there, cool, A, right? But even more importantly, we think that participation is a really big part of that. Are you coming to class on time? Are you working when it's work time? Are you really engaged? And most importantly, are you being respectful? Because I think if a student is making great work, killing it, but they're being a dick, that's not okay. That brings down the creative community, and that's not the energy that we want. Right? So you would never dock somebody's grade without talking to them about it first, right? You would always have those conversations, but the participation is so, so important. So generally, it's like, if they're hitting all these things, but their baseline is whack, they're still getting an A, I mean, I might push back a little bit. I might say if a kid is using a Raspberry Pi to create a synthesizer and taking apart guitars,
Yeah.
it sounds like a musician to me.
Well, yeah, definitely.
You know?
But I'm talking about what they express in terms of interest. Because I
Right.
had that same question. I'm like, hey, you want this drum machine?
But it's again,
Like, no.
again though, it's like if we take an expansive view of music, right? This is the thing that I brush up against with music teachers the most is like, I think that harsh noise is as valid of music as a concerto. I think that it's all valid.
Right.
And I think that like taking a really expansive view of what a musician is really important. And I think schools and music education in general really drills down in just a narrow band of what music is, forgetting that there's 359 other degrees of what music can be and what music really is. And all of us in an Ableton office in Pasadena, right, I'm sure we've been to concerts where we've had our minds expanded by different things that we're hearing. That's not true for a lot of young people. And I think it's up to us to create great curricula and create opportunities to learn to where we can give students the courage to step outside. I think, really like being like, hey, you might not think of yourself as a musician, but I do.
Yeah, absolutely.
You
Yeah,
know?
No, I totally agree with what you're saying. I'm on the same page.
Right.
Hey, Lawrence, real quick, it's 12:15 now. Let's do 30 more minutes.
Great. I don't need 30 more minutes, yeah.
Okay.
I know we want to make sure we have
Take a
time for Will.
15-minute break,
Okay.
and then we'll get Will up there.
So I should wrap by,
12:45.
for sure.
And then we'll start Will's presentation promptly at 1 for everyone in the room. And if you need to get up, stretch your legs, use the bathroom, we've got water and snacks upstairs, so please feel free at any point.
Well, okay, perfect. We've had a lot of good discussion already, so I'm going to skip ahead to those games. Remember, I mentioned that we were going to be doing games in the point of mixing it up, keeping it fresh. I'm going to highlight this game, and then we're going to do a different game after this. Electronic musical chairs. This is kind of similar to what Chuck was talking about earlier. Essentially, what we do here is you have students broken up into groups, right? Maybe 4 or 5 students in a group. They're all at their computers, headphones on. Make music for 5 minutes. At the end of the timer, take out your headphones, move to the next person's chair, pick up where they left off, and go around until you get back to your original station and hear where they took it. It is so fun. It immediately breaks students out of their little creative lane that they're in, and it mixes up the energy. It's a really, really fun thing to do.
I'm out. That's enough.
You got what you needed? Well, here's another game in honor of the recently deceased genius David Lynch. Raise your hand if you've seen Twin Peaks. Oh, yeah. I was at a conference. I was at Sacramento for CASMEC. Like nobody in the room had seen Twin Peaks. I was like, what the hell's going on? So, did people remember the Black Lodge? Oh, yeah. Right? So what happens in this scene is it's reversed, right? The whole thing is reversed. But their language is not reversed. What they did is they basically record themselves saying it forward, reverse that, figure out how to say the reversed version, so then when you reverse it back, it's normal, right? So let's do that. Let's play the Black Lodge game here. Can somebody please give me a 3 or 4 word phrase? Not all at once.
Ableton is cool.
Ableton is cool. Okay, I'm going to say this here. Ableton is cool. All right, and now I'm going to reverse it. And let's hear this. Oh, hey-o. Sorry about that. Oh, see, next look at. Okay, let's see if we can. Oh, ooh, ooh. Oh, sie, next look at. Ooh, sie. One more time on this.
Sounds German.
Next look at. It does sound German.
Is this a German company?
Neshoge. Something like that. Does anybody want to come up and say sie neshoge? Or should I do it? I'll do it, okay. Okay, here we go. Sie neshoge. Can I get a round of applause? Thank you. All right, so now I'm going to reverse it back. Let's see if it sounds like Ableton is cool. Egosen, he's who? Right. So that's the Black Lodge game. Play this with a group of 8th graders. They're gonna lose it, right? They're gonna really, really laugh. So again, these are 2 games that we include in all of our teachers' handbooks, so that teachers have things that they can do to mix it up. All right, so folks, my last piece here is about listening parties. And this is really so important. This is when we do professional development with the teachers that use our curricula. This is where we spend the most time. Because this is really where the most problems can arise and where we are asking students to get themselves the most vulnerable. So you have to treat it with care, and it has to be done, I don't want to say right, but it has to be done with some real finesse. So let's take a look at this. In our eyes, these group share-outs are indispensable. You gotta do it. If your students are just turning in work to you and you're giving them a grade and you move on to the next project, that's a loss. That's a huge missed opportunity. And I guarantee you, them playing it for each other raises the stakes significantly. If they know that, that kid that they think is cute on the other side of the room is going to be hearing it, they care a lot more about their opinion than yours, right? So playing it out loud is going to definitely raise the stakes. And this is a huge step towards embracing vulnerability as an artist. And then not only are they playing it, but you're talking about it after. There's discourse after each track is played. So that is a huge opportunity to develop, sort of speaking and listening skills, hit all those standards, but put those terms that they should know into practice. And you might have to kind of pry a little bit and ask some questions along the way. That's fine. But truly, folks, creative community and listening parties. If you take anything away from this conversation today, these are the things that if you're not thinking about, it's time to start thinking about it today. Okay, expectations. I've already said I'm a really big believer in saying things out loud, being explicit about what you want folks to do, making it clear that a listening party is a safe space and that you expect respect. And if a student is disrespectful, you're going to call their mom, right? You're not, this is the finesse. This is the thing, though, right, guys? As Trent's heard me say this a million times as we've trained teachers and whatever. It's like, as a creative teacher, you set up this box where you're like, hey, if you stay within these limits, you can basically do whatever you want. We can have so much fun. You can make the music you like. But the moment you start making fun of another kid, I'm no longer this happy, cool teacher. I'm calling your mom, right? Like, I'm not messing around and being very crystal clear that you are taking this deadly serious. And again, this is that trust piece that students have to know that you are respecting that vulnerability that you're asking. And again, if we're talking about 7th and 8th graders, this is like life and death for them. This is huge. So we gotta be like no joke about this. And you have to make it clear that you expect students to participate in the discourse. Every kid's gonna play their track, but not only that, we gotta make sure that everybody talks. So you might have to volunteer kids. You might have to ask folks who haven't been participating. That's fine. Yeah, please.
Once you start to get to know your students and which kid, there'll always be that one kid when they play something and everyone else is like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Then once I figure out where that is, like the pecking order of most impressive.
I'd avoid that, but yeah.
But subjectively,
Sure.
I'm not going to tell the kids that.
Right.
But I'm like, try to call on those kids towards the end. So
Sure.
we set this like high creative bar, then the other 7 kids who still have to share, like, oh, I don't want to follow them.
I don't know, man. I think about this a little bit differently, but I think that as teachers, there's always something really great that we can find in every kid's project. And I think that it's up to us to look a little bit deeper than just like, does this track bang or not? Right? Because there's going to be some kids that are going to make better produced, more well-designed projects, sure. And I think, yes, you can't kind of change the way it sounds out of the speakers, right? But I think we can, as the teacher, model looking a little bit deeper. And this does get into this next piece, right? I generally think it's a good idea for the teacher, not every time, sometimes you will want to mix it up and say, all right, class, what do you guys think first? But in general, the teacher will say, here's what I think was working well, here's where there's room for improvement.
I do that, but I'm just thinking tactically, the kids are always going to have the response that they're going to have. So tactically, just to like protect the safe space, I will try to like put the Jasper Harris last. Even
Right.
though he's like the coolest student, he would never be demeaning to anyone.
Right. I will say though, the kids are savvy, man. And if they see that you are always putting the badass last, they're gonna be like, all right, here it comes. I think it's like you're creating an environment where it's like a workshop, where it's not about the finished product as the end all be all. It's about the effort, it's about the energy, it's about the intention. And even tracks that might be like murky and like horribly recorded, whatever, there might be something in that when you kind of like open your ears up and try to put yourself in their shoes, that can be really electrifying. And I think they will pick up on that if you are putting the like
setting the tone and the precedent.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
I do that. And so I guess you're saying modeling, the students can start to think that way too.
Right.
So it's not just, does this sound like a hit song?
Right.
Like, oh, there's some cool sound design in this one, or, oh, that's an interesting melody in that one.
Exactly right. Yeah. There's a professor named Liz Lerman that has this awesome critical response process book where she talks about statements of meaning in critiques, where you're not saying something is good or bad. You're talking about how it makes you feel, what it evokes, what is exciting, what is striking, what is interesting in what you heard. So again, when you ask the students, if you've said, hey, here's what's working, here's where there's room for improvement, I'm a big believer in constructive criticism. You're going to have students that are going to say, I liked it. It's good. Okay, what's good about it? Let's pull on that thread. And again, this is when they start using those terms, start having to actually express what's going on. I think that you can also say, how did this make you feel? Did this give you an image in your mind? Right, there's ways to help students get there. But this like statements of meaning thing, I think, is really, really cool in avoiding good and bad. Yeah. Again, creative community, right? Where it's not about being the best. It's about being like engaged with the group. Now I do have limited time, and there's a few more things that I do want to hit in here. If we have time for questions before 12:45.
Can you just be clear? Are you hanging out all day?
Oh yeah, I'm chilling, absolutely. But I do want to. There's a few key things because again, listening parties. This is 10 out of 10 difficulty, and this is 10 out of 10 importance. So we talked a little bit about this inspiration instead of intimidation. Right, listening parties are really where you can be like, that track was awesome. I absolutely love what you did here. Talk a little bit about how you did that. That gassing kids up is so important. Good sound goes a long way. This is, I think, a revelation for a lot of sort of band, orchestra, choir teachers that are stepping into music tech. They're like, oh, my little Logitech computer speakers aren't going to cut it.
No.
Absolutely not, right? Because if you're asking your students to step out and to make themselves vulnerable in that way, and they have a big hit of bass, we want to make sure that bass comes through when they play it, right? And you know, this is the kit that we have our schools buy. These JBL 306 speakers are not expensive, and they bang. They're loud. And a little Focusrite, you know, the Scarlett goes. This is all you really need, and it works great. So okay, 3 rules: phones, all devices away. Got to be like, there's no exception to that. All students must remain quiet when the music is being played or when they're not giving feedback. Huge, right? You can't be talking when someone else's track is playing. Not going to happen. And all songs must get a round of applause before and after, right? We're going to listen to Trent's piece. Can we give Trent a round of applause? Yeah. So he heads into this being like, okay, cool. No matter what happens, I'm already supported, right? And then a round of applause after. Again, sort of radical positivity. It's not about being great. It's about trying your best and learning in that process. For folks just getting started, and especially if you're working with littler ones, sometimes doing an anonymous listening party is really helpful, where students submit their work and you don't say whose track is whose, right? So that can be great. We've had some teachers be like, hey, it's January and I'm still doing anonymous listening parties. Can't do that, right? In general, I would say your listening parties should be, anonymous once or twice, but then they got to take the leap. They got to say, I made this, and talk about it. Sometimes for the feedback, it can be cool to have it not just where you're having your discourse talking about it like that. Sometimes writing can be cool. So students can like write down their feedback. We've seen like a gallery walk where there's computers set up and you go and you listen and you write your feedback like that. Then students can also, after they've received that feedback, say, okay, what do you plan on using this feedback for? What are you going to do with that from there? So these are just kind of 2 variations that I wanted to highlight. Feedback questions, as I already highlighted, what's working well in the music? Where is there room for improvement? These are some sentence starters that we've seen be really, really helpful. I like how you did blank with the blank. It's a great way to help students who don't know how to engage say what they think is working well and where is there room for improvement. Again, constructive criticism is tough. Students can feel like they are being attacked. Obviously, you're not. If I was the producer, I would have done. That doesn't say that what they did was wrong. It's just saying you might have made a different choice. Okay. Thank you, guys. So.